Good morning.
Morning.
I know that was a lot, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah, that's a lot. Well, good morning. Good morning. So, just saw the arrest, the betrayal, and how did Jesus handle himself in all that?
Neutral.
Neutral, compassionate. I mean, even there at the end, as he was walking out, and he was leaving Caiaphas. He looked at Judas and put his hand on his chest, and it was like he was forgiving him in that moment. It's okay. Forgiveness is such a powerful, powerful tool. And how do we get there? I mean, every time I think about the story, I have to put myself in that position and go, how would I handle that? How would I feel if all my friends, and they're just playing their role. I mean, and Judas and Jesus were close. They were tight for the years that they were together. They side by side, walking the road, teaching, learning, growing together, doing all the things. And then in the end, Judas, looking at the landscape of things, says, you know what? It's time for, I think from a certain point of view, there was time for the prophecies to come true. And Judas saw his role and was like, okay, I'm going to do, this is my part. And Jesus, from a certain point of view, foresaw his part, foresaw what he was doing, and he knew what he had to do. And even in the midst of all that, it's like, what would I do? What is the lesson in all of this for me? If I'm feeling betrayed, if I'm feeling put upon, if I'm feeling like you know what, I don't want to do this. I don't want to walk through this. Like as I was sitting down to write this talk, I was sharing with Reverend Jill earlier. I roll the ideas around in my head all week or for a couple weeks ahead of time, and then I sit down on Friday to start putting stuff on paper, and I fought it and I struggled it, and things, life kind of kept getting in the way, and finally I was like, what's going on here? Because it usually flows a lot easier. And it's like, okay, I need to do time to do some self-reflection, some self-examination. What maybe am I holding on to that I need to kind of dig around in my own consciousness and say, okay, what am I holding on to? What do I need to let go of to get out of the way? And once I figured it out, things started to flow and they got on the paper, and here we are. The role forgiveness plays in our lives is that it frees up our energy, it frees up our focus, it frees up our emotional nature, our feeling nature. Because it takes energy, it takes focus to hold on to that stuff. And sometimes we've been holding on to it for so long that it's like a habit. And we don't even think about it. And all of a sudden it'll pop up, I know for myself, all of a sudden I'll be going along and something will happen and I get upset. And I'm like, why am I so upset about that? That really wasn't that big a thing. Like maybe the dishes don't get done for a couple days. And I get all wound up about it. And it's like, why are you so upset, Lee? It has nothing to do with the dishes, right? It has to do with something else completely. And the dishes just happen to be a convenient trigger and an opportunity for me to get upset. Bernard Meltzer has this to say. When you forgive, you in no way change the past, but you sure do change the future. Now, truth is, we don't change the past. We change our relationship to it, certainly. Because as I go through the process of forgiveness, as I go through the process of discharging the emotional energy I have around a certain event in my past, I go through the process of releasing the sadness, the anger, the self-loathing, the guilt, or whatever it is around what happened in the past, and work through all of that. I've certainly changed my relationship to it. So much so that when that thing happens out here in the world, that all of a sudden I get that up until now I've been triggered about, that instantaneously takes me back to that past event. Anybody else have this experience, or is it just me? All right, just checking. I see a lot of blank stares out in the room, and I'm like, okay, am I just off base or what? No, I'm kidding. Right? And then all of a sudden, I'm a crumbling mess in the corner, sobbing over the dishes not getting done. Really? It's really not about that. It's about me coming face to face with me. It's about me coming face to face with hanging on to whatever it was, hanging on to the absence of forgiveness, or hanging on to the guilt, the anger, the fear, the self-loathing. And in truth, it's all fear. That's a whole other conversation. But letting it go frees me up to be present with what's going on in this moment. Taking a non-resistant attitude about it, like Jesus. Jesus had accepted his place. Jesus had accepted his role, accepted the chain of events that was unfolding in his life. He wasn't pushing back against it. He was no longer in a position of saying, no, 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 no. He'd moved through that in the garden, right? He'd said, let this cup pass from me. And now he's just not non-resistantly just walking into the chain of events that he knows is going to unfold. Now, in addition to Jesus' story, I went and did some research last night and this morning. All of a sudden, it kind of clicked in that today was St. Patrick's Day. Pardon me, I'm going to lose this jacket because it's really warm up here. I went and looked at St. Patrick. Anybody else done research on St. Patrick? Okay. Steve. All right. But it's a great little story, and that fits in with forgiveness because St. Patrick, in case you didn't know, St. Patrick as an early teen in Scotland, Great Britain, was kidnapped by raiders from Ireland, transported over to Ireland, and was kept there as a slave, herding sheep for 6 years or so. I didn't know that. And then after 6 years, he escaped, went back, became a clergyman, became a priest, and eventually became a bishop, and then got a calling to go back to Ireland on mission to the people in Ireland, to bring them into the church. Now imagine the degree of forgiveness and love he had to have embraced in his own life in order to do that. To go back and share the message, to share love, to bring the people of Ireland as much as he could into the church, because at that time, most of Ireland was pretty much a pagan, earth-based spiritual tradition, as it were. So he had his work cut out for him. So I found that real interesting and actually pretty inspiring. I'm going to do some more research. I didn't do a deep dive into, didn't have time to do a deep dive into St. Patrick, but it was very interesting and very good for me to see that it was a very connective story to what we're talking about. Had I been enslaved on an island for 6 years, I think I would have been a little reluctant to go back. But he found it in his heart to do so and to share that love with the people of Ireland. Jessica Lang has this to say about similar about forgiveness. She says, acceptance, tolerance, and forgiveness, these or those, are life-altering lessons. Acceptance, tolerance, and forgiveness. And isn't that what St. Patrick was practicing? Acceptance and tolerance and forgiveness. Because one of the things that he was practicing, that Jesus was practicing, and that we teach and practice here is that life will show up for us as we show up for it. It's like, to the degree that we show up with love and tolerance and forgiveness and acceptance, isn't that what we get met with? Or in the face of anger or upset, in the face of conflict, if I can hold my own place with acceptance and tolerance and compassion, eventually doesn't the rest of that energy settle down? I found that to be true in my life. If I can meet anger with a sense of peace, if I can meet upset with a sense of acceptance and tolerance and patience, if I can pause and breathe rather than instantaneously reacting in fear or upset with that upset, if I can meet it with something different, it settles. If I pause and I breathe, that's an opportunity to meet that conflict with a sense of peace, with a sense of calm, with a sense of acceptance, or even forgiveness may be necessary in those moments if conflict is being presented to me like, you know what, you're really screwed up, and like, wait a minute. No. That's a perception perhaps on the behalf of somebody else. And even if I did make a mistake and I get upset about it, if I can breathe through it and say, okay, I made a mistake. That's part of being human. And then I get to learn. Then I get to grow. Then I get to move on and move forward and maybe make my own change and do something differently. Marianne Williamson goes on to say this in one of her essays. She says, forgiveness is not always easy. At times it feels more painful than the wound we have suffered. And yet, there is no peace without forgiveness. Sometimes forgiveness is more painful than the wound we have suffered. Wow. I read that and I went, yeah, I've felt that in my life. Because I get comfortable being angry. I get comfortable holding on to that little piece of leverage I get to hold over that person that did me wrong. And if I'm holding on to that and that's all that is happening inside of me, is that other person feeling it? No. No, they're not. Who's the one feeling all that? Who's the one feeling all that self-righteous anger and upset and na 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 neener 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 neener, all that nonsense? And it is. And yes, I'm talking to me too. Who's the one experiencing all that? Where's all that happening? It's happening right here. It's happening in my world. It's not happening. It's probably not happening in their. They've probably forgotten all about it, whatever that thing was. They've moved on, chances are. And if they haven't, it's still only happening in my world. Because odds are I'm not talking to them about it. I'm not sending them an email chewing them out or leaving them nasty little voicemails on their phone or whatever. None of that's happening. All we have is distance. All we have is a disconnect between me and somebody else that maybe, just maybe, if I let it go, what happens? If I let it go, chances are I'm going to be more peaceful. Chances are I'm going to feel better about me. And just maybe, I will feel better about them. And maybe I will have more love in my life because I will have one more possible loving connection where up until now I had a connection that was what? Full of conflict. Yeah, negative. That was a drain on me. So rather than it being a drain on me, maybe it's a source of love and support. Or maybe it's just neutral. And even if it's just neutral, it's better than this. Right? So do I want to have a collection of drains over here? Or would I rather have a whole collection of loving, supportive, celebratory relationships? And the occasional little neutral one thrown in. With the potential to be loving and supportive and so on and so forth. You follow? What's possible? What's possible if I open myself to that? So I have two questions for us this morning. Here's the first. The first question is, you ready? How can I get out of my own way? Kind of the inverse of that. Another way to look at that is, how am I getting in my own way? How am I stopping myself from forgiving? So I chose to reframe it a little bit differently. It's how can I get out of my own way when it comes to forgiveness? How can I get out of my own way when it comes to holding on to things that are just dragging me back? Because if I have an attachment to some situation, to some position, that is a source of anger, resentment, self-loathing, guilt, fear, upset, any situation in my past that is just a trigger, and those triggers are self-created, by the way, right? And we get to move them around or just disengage from them if we want. If we're willing to do the work, the question is, how can I get out of my own way? And we all have our own little tools that work best for us. And and if you want some more tools, you can come talk to me, come talk to Reverend Jill or any other handful of people that may be in this space. We have a lot of really smart people in our community. Prayer, meditation, journaling, reading, classes, just finding somebody to just talk to. Somebody that you can sit down with and say, you know what? Because sometimes I need this, because this is the way I work. The way I figure stuff out is by talking a lot. If I can find somebody to just say, look, I just need you to sit there and listen to me. I need to talk this out. And I'll start talking, and all of a sudden, I'll figure something out. You've seen me stand here on Sunday morning and figure stuff out on more than one occasion. Like, oh my gosh, that's really good. Somebody write that down. But that's the beauty of community, right? Is surrounding ourselves with people that will love and support us, that will listen to us, or that will say, look, Lee, you're being really stupid right now. Can you just stop? I like that. You can be nicer about it. You know what I mean? You get the idea, right? Because more often than not, we're just in our own way. We're holding on to a position that is not serving us anymore. And that's kind of part two, the second question. Part two is, what am I holding on to? Yeah. What am I holding on to that has kept me bound? It's kind of another way of looking at the same question. What am I holding on to that has kept me bound? Because if I'm holding on to something about somebody else, the only one bound by that, the only one tied up by that, the only one held back by that is me. It is me. So if I'm holding on to guilt, if I'm holding on to self-loathing, if I'm holding on to fear, anger, resentment, all of this stuff, whew, go home and I invite you to go home and make a list of all the stuff you're angry about, all the stuff you're fearful about. And ask the question, how do I let it go? One at a time. How do I let it go? Because for starters, that's the path to freedom. You journal about it, you pray about it, call a practitioner about it, call a friend about it, whatever it takes. Because those things, that list, that's the stuff that's holding us back. And walking through those things one at a time, because sometimes I've made that list and it looked like an elephant, right? What did Desmond Tutu say? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? Just little bites. It took us how many years to create that list? It's not going to disappear overnight. But we can make progress. We can make a little bit of progress every day because this is the path to freedom. This is the path that Jesus walked. This is the path that St. Patrick walked. This is the path that we can walk. We can choose to be love. We can choose to be free. We can choose to be the one that simply lets go of the anger and the fear and the resentment and the self-loathing and the guilt, all of it. Because we have the opportunity in the face of all of that to, rather than hold on to it, rather than to get locked into a position that we've held for so long, has become so comfortable, so automatic, where we can choose love. As I was walking out the door, or getting ready to walk out the door this morning, I was looking for another book that I found and gave to Steve. And this other book popped up, this book that we used last year, Deep Kindness by Houston Kraft. And it flipped open to this page. I kid you not. This is the way my world works. Probably yours too, I would imagine. And he's talking about kindness. We talked about deep kindness. And it was just a wonderful month last year. We talked about kindness, the work of acknowledging of what gets in the way of kindness. So you can take the word kindness out and insert the whole concept of forgiveness. Okay? Sometimes the most challenging, messy, and self-confrontational piece of the emotional maturity puzzle. If we don't know what skills to build, what questions to ask, or what internal clarity is needed to exercise forgiveness with fullness and persistence, then we might end up stuck practicing what he calls confetti kindness in perpetuity. The point of what he's getting to, this is where the Desmond Tutu quote came up again, because it's that it feels like a massive undertaking. And so what does one bite at a time look like? He says, with kindness. And I'm talking about forgiveness, and I think this still applies. He says, did you know that 45% of our day is built on routine? Do you realize that? 45% of your day is built on routine. That means 45% of our week is habit-based, which means 45% of our month is habitual, which means that almost half our lives are spent on autopilot. What portion of that 45% is the habit we have created around unforgiveness, around the things we have held on to? So the question for me is, what's possible for me or for you if I really take the time to do the deep work necessary to clear out all that unforgiveness, to clear out all that resentment, all that anger, and imagine just how free I could be if I let all that go. How much opportunity might I have if I emptied this side of that equation and moved it all over here? How much more love might I have? How much more joy might I have? How much more enthusiasm, magic, serendipitous moments? How much more love might I have? How much more ability might I have to have deep, meaningful, loving connections with more people in my life? Were I that free? Wow. What's possible with all of that? And from a certain point of view, in my own mind and my own heart, it's a matter of saying, it's not so much focusing on this stuff, this nonsense, all this chaos over here, but it's focusing on the love and saying, okay, you know what? I am just going to simply open myself up to a greater, more expanded experience of love. And when this stuff pops up, I'm just going to say, no, no more. I'm done. Rather than all this, I'm just going to choose love. I'm going to choose to allow myself to be just non-resistant, to let the fear wash over me, to let the doubt and uncertainty just wash over me, the self-loathing, the guilt, the shame. I'm just going to let it all go. Because rather than that experience, I'm simply going to choose love and all its cousins to be part of my life. One final quote this morning from a pastor. I used to listen, when I lived in Texas, I would just I don't know how I found him, but he was pretty awesome, and I loved listening to this man, T.D. Jakes, Pastor T.D. Jakes. And he says, we cannot embrace God's forgiveness if we are so busy clinging to the past wounds and nursing old grudges. It's that simple. Just let him go. Just let him go. Of course, he says it much more passionately than I did, but because that's his way. Not holding on to him anymore. Just going to let him go. Just going to let them go. So, practicing principles is very straightforward, very simple, and then we'll get into the open mic. Practice forgiveness. Sometimes a good question is more valuable than a dozen answers. This week, you're invited to explore the two questions that I mentioned in the talk this morning. Use them as your own journal prompts if you like. How do I get out of my own way? And what am I holding on to that has kept me bound? So I invite you to embrace these two questions this week. Sometimes living in the question is far more powerful than somebody handing us a bunch of answers. Okay? With that, it's up to you. And I'm just going to talk directly to the people online for a moment. You can type, if you have a question for somebody online, our online community, if you have a question, type it into the chat and we'll read it into the room. Yes, Penny. Yes, yeah, ready. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, when you started talking, what came up for me was I have two sisters, and one we don't talk about or talk to because she's unhappy, so she's mean. And we being me, my other sister, I don't know how to let. I don't think about her unless something's said or something, which is seldom.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I'm still mad at her because whenever she happens to talk to my other sister, which is seldom,
Mm-hmm.
she's still mad at me. So she keeps bringing. I mean, she's mad at me. She's so mad at me for something I did when I was 16. So it's that's what came up. So I don't know what to do with her because I don't talk to her. She called me on my birthday a few years ago, and we hadn't talked for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked at the clock and I looked, thought, okay, can I talk to her right now? And I did. I let her talk for 20 minutes and then hung up. Whatever, that's fine. Let it go. And then the next year she expected me to call on her birthday, but I didn't. So then when she had to call my other sister last year about somebody who died, she brought up about it. She's mad at me still. Just, I don't know.
Okay. What occurs to me is that let me ask a quick question. So, are you upset with her? No. Is it? Does it feel like a drain for you when you think about her?
It bothers me that she's still angry.
Okay. So she's angry. You're not angry. You're not angry. Okay. Do you feel responsible for her upset? No. I'm just checking. So she's choosing this path. And so all we can do, all you can do, right, in this situation is to simply love her because it's a choice she's making to be upset. And so, yeah, it's unfortunate. It's sad. Yeah, right. And so all I can do is have love and compassion for her, right? So thank you. It's a good question because I'm sure you're not the only one in the space with a situation like that. So thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else? Anybody online? Let me see. I'm looking. Okay.
I don't know if the situation is, I mean, it's not the same. Maybe there's some similarities, but I've had a rather contentious relationship with my sister over the years, sometimes great, sometimes not speaking to each other. And I decided I didn't like that situation anymore. So, whatever the last thing was that happened, in your case, something when you were 16, I really considered what part of that situation, because of course I was right, but what part of that situation can I take responsibility for? Because there's two people and there's responsibility, and it's maybe not 100%, but maybe there's some little percentage that I found in mine actually that I could take responsibility for. And then one day I mustered up the courage to apologize. And it was so simple. And just like magic, we have a great relationship again. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
So I did try that. I apologized twice to her, and I went up and hugged her, and she said she forgave me. Yeah, of course, it's something. I locked the door before she was trying to get in it. Big deal.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you both. Anybody else? One more? All right. Let's take it all into prayer then. Thank you, everybody. One more. Okay. Okay. Let's take this all into prayer and remember with me that God is all there is. We call it divine life, call it source, call it God, call it infinite mind, infinite love, all of these things. All these words to describe something that is so infinite and so expansive that it is all there is. And so it is in this that we live and move and have our being, and it in us, as us, through each and every one of us, right here, right now, in this moment, the very breath we breathe, closer to us than our hands and our feet. And so I know for myself and for each and every one of us here, for those of us listening online, watching online now or later, I know first and foremost that all is well, that life is good and very good. And we name that good, for our good is our God. And our God is life and love and truth. It is beauty, health, and wholeness. It is prosperity, perfect and right order in all our ways and all our days. And this is true for each and every one of us. And so anywhere up until now where there may have been some upset in some way, shape, or form, we know there is now peace. We know there is joy. We know there is love. It is right here where we are. It is with every breath, every thought, every activity. It is love forever growing and expanding in, through, and as each and every one of us. And it is reflected back to us in every experience. It is uplifting. It is enlivening. It is enthusiasm itself in all of our ways and each and every day. And right now we set aside all that has gone before and we claim love. We claim wholeness. We receive it and we accept it. We know that truly we are forgiven and that all is well and we are free. And so we let it be. And so it is.
So it is.